All right, we have with us today Sam Baker. He's the founder and CEO of Wriggle Brew. Don't get that wrong, because I was saying Wiggle Brew for a while. There's an R in there. Thanks so much for being with us, Sam.
Tongue twister.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It is a hard word to say, Wriggle Brew, W-R-I-G-G-L-E, but that's kind of part of the strategy, make it hard to pronounce, more memorable.
That's true. So what's wriggling in this equation?
Earthworms. So it's all about earthworms. It's earthworms being used to make fertilizer, being used to break down food waste, and ultimately, one of the really cool things we're doing with earthworms is using them to eat plastic waste.
That is really cool.
But I mean, I've done worm composting before, and there were a couple times where like a plastic fork ended up in, my worm composter.
And they didn't eat it.
They didn't eat it. Is it just the wrong flavor of plastic, or how do you go about having worms eat plastic?
Well, this is the interesting thing. So you're right to point out, worms by themselves they don't eat plastic, just if you throw it in their worm bin, right? That's not going to work for them. They only eat plastic after it's been processed to make it essentially more palatable for them. Another way of putting this is basically worms themselves don't really eat plastic. It's more so that there are microbes that live in their gut that are actually capable of digesting plastic. And normally those microbes don't have access to plastics because the worm itself, it's not chewing through like a plastic fork in your situation to get that stuff into the gut. But there are some larvae, some we'll call them worms. They're not really worms, but there are some larvae, black soldier fly larvae, so the larvae of like flies, the larvae of certain beetles, that do actually have the same bacteria these earthworms do and have mandibles so they can chew. And some of these guys have actually been observed biting and chewing through softer plastics and eating and digesting them. If you look up like a picture of mealworms eating polystyrene, you can actually see them literally chewing their way through a solid block of polystyrene foam and eating it as they do so. And these guys have been found not only to be able to digest this plastic, which means they're actually breaking it down completely chemically, but also they've been observed gaining weight while doing this. So they're actually getting larger. Their biomass is increasing, which means they are subsisting off of plastic entirely, which is pretty cool. Now that's polystyrene plastic. It's not all plastics, but some of the enzymes they are producing in their gut work on other kinds of plastics as well. So our work has been, how can we expand this obscure novel principle of worms occasionally eating plastics to process plastics in bulk and to turn it into worm food that they can eat a lot more quickly.
Okay.
So do we have to bring it to a French restaurant first? Like, what do we have to...
Yeah, so there are a couple things that have to be done to it, but the big one is the plastic has to be essentially made softer for worms to eat. So what we're starting with is chunks of plastic like PET or LDP, so that's like plastic bags or water bottles or things like that. And what we're doing with them is we're heating them up a lot. So we're adding a lot of energy to them. And when we add that energy to them, it starts to decrystallize the plastic, so it makes it softer. And in some cases, it pyrolyzes it. So it actually breaks down entirely into the oils and resins that plastic originated as. And those oils and resins and softer decrystallized plastics, we don't feed those directly to worms. What we do is we actually simulate a worm's gut. So we'll build what's called a bioreactor. So just like the worm bin you have at home, it's basically like a big kind of composter, except it's liquid. And inside of this liquid, we'll add in our softened plastic and we'll add in our oil and our resin, and we will add in the microbes that we harvest from the gut of worms. Those guys will survive in this liquid environment. We'll bubble it with oxygen so that they're nice and aerated, and they will begin to eat through these plastic oils and resins. And after a few days, they will eat through pretty much all of it and poop out, essentially, a whole bunch of organic acids, secondary metabolites, stuff that can then be fed to earthworms.
Interesting.
So you've just taken a process that takes plastic, which normally everyone would call inorganic, even though it is organic chemistry. And that's why when I was a plastics engineer at school, we had to take organic chemistry 1 and 2. But all of it has to do with like carbon chains and stuff like that. And normally we think, oh, that's plastic, don't eat it. And you shouldn't eat plastic. Right. But essentially what you're doing is breaking it down into something that is bioavailable to like the Earth's biome, like plants.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So like, you're exactly right. You look at, for example, chemically, LDPE. right? Low density polyethylene. That's basically just a chain of carbons and like stuck one next to the other with hydrogens stuck onto either side. That's all it is. It's literally just carbon and hydrogen. So yes, it is organic in the like organic chemistry sense. It's not biological, but it is organic. So all we're doing is we're taking that carbon hydrogen chain and we are breaking it into smaller molecules that these bacteria can eat and use as a food source. And when they do that, they take it from a polymer, from this complex matrix of carbon and hydrogen that cannot be attacked, cannot biodegrade, and they break it apart into a series of smaller bits and pieces that are much more easily digested by all kinds of organisms. And then that is a food source, which worms can eat.
And when you say bits and pieces, you're not saying microplastics, because microplastics are large pieces of plastic molecules that are small in size, but they're still chemically the plastic. You're saying you're actually breaking apart the molecules to turn them into other kind of molecules.
Yes, and you're very right. That's a very critical distinction because a lot, like for example, if you like take a plastic bottle and you like grind it up in a machine, you will get like a bunch of powder. You'll get a bunch of micro nanoplastics. Those are bad. We don't want those. Those are what we're finding like inside of our brains. We're finding these in our kidneys and in our reproductive organs. Those are not good. What we are doing is we are breaking it down at a molecular level. So the individual, and we'll say like polystyrene, for example. Polystyrene has a circle. It's an aromatic ring like this with an active group stuck on top of it. We are taking that aromatic ring and we're cracking it open. We're breaking it apart into pieces, into smaller and smaller molecules, even atoms in some cases. And those are being released as gases. So that's the respiration of the microorganism, or they're being taken in as biomass, or they're being processed and pooped out as other organic compounds, but now biodegradable organic compounds, manure.
But it sounds like there's got to be a gotcha in here somewhere, because if this was so great, then why haven't we done it before? Because right now we're taking our plastics and throwing them in the ocean and throwing them in landfills.
Yeah, there's kind of two answers to that. So the first part is why has no one done this before? Because that's the question that I had numerous times while we were going through this process.
I know why. It's because we recycle the plastic. We get to reuse it. We reuse all the plastic that we make, of course.
I mean, you're not far off, actually. So that is like, I think that's probably a contributor is a lot. And I get this a lot when I talk to people like, well, why not just recycle it? Why are you trying to turn it into something else? Well, and the answer to that, I think, is because recycling doesn't work. I mean, we've talked about recycling since like Captain Planet was airing like back in the 90s. And at best, we've been able to achieve like a 30% recycling rate. Plastics are dirty. They're mixed with other kinds of plastics. Sometimes they have colorants in them. So even if you do like the best you can, you're still only getting like 1/3 are getting turned into a second object. And then that 1/3, you take another 1/3 of those that are going to get recycled the next time around. So it's just a losing formula. So that's why I think recycling is not really a good, it's not a solution. It doesn't get rid of these plastics. But the reason I think this method hasn't been used is it really comes down to the siloing of scientific research from problem solving. So a lot of people who work in the research world they're playing the grant game. So we're chasing after getting grant funding. We're chasing after getting, whatever published we can. And when you're in the publication game or the grant game, it's often about, okay, what cool new technique can I use? What cool new equipment can I use? And maybe not so much about how can I actually solve this problem. So what we're doing is we're doing some high-tech stuff on the one end, which is we're using bioreactors, we're using high-temperature processing of materials, we're using catalysts to crack and break these plastics. But then we're taking all of their manure and an offtake of the bacteria, and we're just dumping that into a worm farm. So now we're going very low-tech. So there are two silos where you have this like higher-tech silo where researchers are looking into bacteria being used to degrade plastics. And then you have this low-tech silo where people are working on worm farming. And nary the two shall meet. They don't communicate with each other very much. And as a consequence, there's not a lot of technological exchange between the two. So as far as I've been able to see, no one has done this. No one has actually gone and said, okay, I'm going to take plastic, I'm going to break it down with bacteria, and then I'm going to take all of that bacterial effluent and stuff, and I'm going to turn that into worm castings. And I have done that. We've done that a few times. So that's what this is, for example, this is a couple like plastic bottles that we broke down using our process and converted into, and this is, you can see here, into worm castings. And
so now we have
It's
poop.
perfectly.
Wait,
yeah.
so I mean, you just turned plastic into poop. I mean, does anyone really want
Well,
poop?
actually, I mean, that's gold. Anyone who's a gardener watching right now is like, give me some of that, because that is gold.
yes, and that's exactly right. So like, who does want poop though, right? Like gardeners want it, but actually what we've been finding is a lot of farmers want this. So here in the US, we have all these farms that are getting a lot of their fertilizer in from abroad. So we get a lot of phosphorus from abroad, we get a lot of nitrogen from abroad, and those are volatile. We've seen, especially because of the tariff situation recently, the price of fertilizers in many cases have gone up, or at the very least they've been jumping around, which is bad for farmers. And secondarily, before that, when the Ukraine war kicked off, right, a lot of our nitrogen fertilizer is a byproduct of petroleum manufacturing. Petroleum manufacturing is affected by the Ukraine war. Price of fertilizer in America, nitrogen fertilizer, briefly spiked 400% in 2022. That's crazy. That is a massive, massive spike. And that can put farmers out of business. So
What
Is
we're
that
doing
why
is we're
all
turning.
our food prices went up so dramatically? Like, no, seriously. Like, I mean, I've been feeling it, right?
That's a big part of it.
yeah, it is a big part. And actually in Egypt, this was so bad that it caused a brief famine. And there were concerns, and there were famines throughout Africa, and concerns of famine even potentially hitting Europe, because the price of fertilizer negatively impacted farmers so bad. And so to kind of bring that weave back around to what we're doing, we have tons of plastic here in America. We have huge amounts of plastic waste. We have an endless domestic supply of worm casting feedstock. And worm castings make great fertilizers. That's actually the purpose of our business, more so than even the plastic is. We turn worm castings into a shelf-stable liquid fertilizer called Wriggle Brew. And the significance of that is that up until we came onto the scene, there were no shelf-stable worm tea, liquid worm casting fertilizers. There were no shelf-stable compost tea fertilizers. So the consequence was, if you were a farmer and you want an organic fertilizer that's a liquid, you had very, very few options. And if you want a liquid fertilizer in general, your options were pretty much all the petrochemical synthetic stuff. So we come onto the market with something that's made domestically here in the United States from waste material that we have an endless supply of. And it is made in such a way that it's tariff-proof and volatility-proof and more effective than a lot of these synthetic fertilizers. I mean, it's been a no-brainer for a lot of farmers. So we went from producing like a couple hundred gallons in my garage to this last season, we shipped 30,000 gallons to row crop farmers from, like Iowa, Missouri, Maryland, Texas, Oklahoma, like all over the country. And they're using worm poop for it, which we can make now from plastic. And I think that's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. Can you scale this up? I mean, you already went one scale from your garage to 30,000 gallons. Can you go bigger?
Well, but I mean, wait a minute. How much is this stuff worth? I mean, why scale anything up if you're just going to be selling worm poop? I mean, what's the value add here? How much are you going to make?
Well, so that's actually a very good question. So we've gone through the math on this a couple times, because like we're talking about recycling, right? When people recycle plastics, a lot of times there is actually a value add there, because if you take like polystyrene, for example, if you process that and you get it clean and pure, you can sell that back to the market to make new polystyrene products as a feedstock for about 10 cents to the pound, which is not great, but you can do that. And a lot of businesses do make money doing that. Actually, I was just talking to a grocery store CEO the other day. They make a significant amount of money, like in the millions of dollars, from selling their polystyrene back to the market. But that's a lot of work. And there's also another problem with that, which is that the price of polystyrene and other plastic feedstocks is changing all the time. And it's all dependent on, again, there's tariff shenanigans afoot. There's like oil prices are a big impactor on it. So the prices of plastic are changing all the time. So you can't rely on that as a steady, expected income stream. The other big problem with it, again, is you're competing with clean plastic, with virgin plastics. So, let's say for the month of June, you can sell it for 10 cents to the pound back to the open market. And maybe virgin plastics are selling for 11 cents a pound or something, or 12 cents a pound, because price of oil's gone up, or ethylene has gone up, or one of the feedstocks. But then maybe for July, the virgin plastics are now selling for 8 cents a pound, and you're still selling the recycled stuff for 10 cents a pound. Now you're not competitive. Now you're not going to actually be able to sell that. And so a lot of places, grocery stores included, end up with stockpiles of plastic they have recycled that they cannot sell. And then they end up having to pay tipping fees to get rid of it. So when we turn it into worm castings, the price of worm castings is about 20 to 30 cents a pound when you sell it in major bulk, not including shipping. When you include shipping, then you're starting to get into like the 40 cents, 50 cents a pound. And if you sell it as a retail product, then it's like $2, $3 a pound. That is orders of magnitude more profitable than selling the plastic back into the open market. Now, there's processing that goes into that, but it's still much better to sell this as an organic material than it is to sell it as a plastic. And then there's the ethical side of it, which is if you try to sell the plastic back into the open market, again, only a third of it's going to be recycled. So ultimately, from an ethical or philosophical perspective, you're just throwing 2/3 of it back into the environment anyway. With this, you're turning it into something that even if 100% of it gets thrown away, it's dirt now. It's dirt that's going to be non-harmful to humans, non-harmful to animals, non-harmful to our fish and to our wildlife. So just from an outcomes perspective, this is a much better material to make it.
Is it more valuable as the tea that you make?
Yes, actually, and that's another point. It's way more valuable as the tea because when we activate it, when we turn it into a liquid that can be plugged directly into a large farmer's system, and we add a couple other things to it. So it's not just like worm castings and water. There's actually quite a lot of processing that goes in on the back end. But when we do all of that, then it turns into about $2 to the pound. So you're going from 10 cents a pound if you sell it as recycled plastic, and that's revenue. We're not talking about all the costs that go into that, to selling it for $2 a pound, or even potentially more than that. If you sell it as a retail product, maybe as much as $10 to the pound. So that is way, way more value creation than just, churning plastic, because there's a value add here. You're turning it into a fertilizer product. And that's not recycling, that's upcycling. That's like a whole different ballgame. And that's why we really think that this is a good model.
It seems like governments would be interested in this because governments are trying to solve this plastics fiasco problem that we have throughout the earth. It seems like they would be desperate to solve it the way you're solving it. So have you talked to any governments, whether it's local, state, or federal?
So we originally pitched this to the federal government as a research grant back in 2022 or 2023, and they liked it. They had a board of PhDs look over it, and they loved it. They said it was a good idea, so they funded us $275,000 to conduct the research on this. This was a federally funded research project originally. We shared the results with our county government and with the city government. They were very interested in it as well. They've actually signed a lot of letters of interest and support for us. They want to start a pilot with us soon so that our local county will actually be giving us all of their polystyrene waste. We've even got some of the local grocery stores involved as well, and they're starting to give us plastics as well. We've had a really hard time reaching the state level. That's been extremely difficult for us. And reaching the federal government beyond the grants side has also been extremely difficult. So we pitched a $1.2 million phase 2, a follow-on to our original grant to them. We just passed through successfully the financial review of that. So, fingers crossed we will get that funding. And if we do, we'll be able to do a much bigger pilot here in our local area. But it's been really hard to get to actually talk and communicate with people, both in the federal government, but also just in like the public in general. We were originally a research team, so we have no experience doing like sales or marketing or a public outreach. So that's been extremely challenging. But the dream is that once we prove this out on a pilot level for our county and our local area, we can start expanding this model throughout the country and destroying plastics, from here to Washington, and then go one step further, start working with those organizations that are cleaning plastics up out of the ocean and have those plastics brought to us and destroyed, instead of going back into the landfill. That's what really excites me.
So kind of walk me through your process again. What does it kind of look like, either at the level that you're doing it at now or what the pilot level or even the full scale level will look like? So you have a big pile of plastic, and you're saying polystyrene. What other kind of plastics can it be? I mean, I know of a few because I went to school. That was what I went to school for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll shoot you plastic names and you tell me if it's yes or no. So, polystyrene, yes. Polyethylene, high density, low density?
Definitely low density, working on high density.
Okay.
Polypropylene, number
Yes.
5.
Okay, good. That one should be recycled, but isn't.
Yeah, you can't recycle it.
PETE, so water bottles?
Yep.
How about PVC?
PVC is a tricky one. That one we have not gotten it to work on yet. Not because the oils and resins that we get out of it aren't digestible, but because of the chlorine, because it's polyvinyl chloride. And dealing with chlorine is really troublesome.
So you can't break apart chlorine. It's an element.
Right.
It doesn't get much smaller than that. You could break it apart, but that's like fission level.
Yeah, we don't have the budget for that one.
So, okay. So you can't do PVC. But I mean, that's like, we're still talking a
Almost
huge
all the retail
portion of pretty much all plastic that you touch on a regular basis.
Currently, we estimate about 80% of plastics we can process.
Well, let me ask you this. If I just dump my recycle bin at your factory, do you have to sort it, or do I have to sort it? Like, how does that work?
No, you don't have to sort it. I mean, sorting it. So this is the thing that's interesting. It is better if it is sorted because we can, like, for example, if it's 100% LDPE, it's a much faster process than if it's LDPE mixed with HDPE. So high density polyethylene is much more crystalline. It takes a lot more energy to break it into oils and resins. And so you have to run hotter and longer. And it's better to isolate that and do that as its own thing, but it isn't necessary. It can be done mixed. And what's more, it can be done with contaminants like food waste and, other organic waste. So if you have like a yogurt container and you throw that in, that's okay. It's going to make water vapor and char, but that's not a problem for us.
Okay, so you're taking all this plastic. What are we doing with the giant pile of plastic? Are we putting it in a big compression thing? Are we squeezing it? You said something about heat. So talk to me about that first step.
The first step is pyrolysis. So this is well known in the plastics world. This is where you heat in the absence of oxygen. Now, it depends on the plastic we're working with, but for a lot of plastics, the goal is to get as much oil and resin and wax coming out the other end. We can gather up some of the gases that come out as well and use that for energy. But basically what that means is we're just heating it up really, really hot in the absence of oxygen. We're cooking it back down into the oils and resins it comes from. That takes a lot of energy.
Burning it. Because
not
burning it would involve the oxygen. What happens if you do burn it? I mean, I assume you get a big plume of smoke and some kind of lovely fumes and then is it called an environmental disaster? Is that what we're...
Yeah, usually though that's so when you burn the problem with burning plastics, like you can burn them for fuel because they are hydrocarbons, they're quite rich, is that they tend to burn very incompletely. So they will burn, and what you get out of it are polyaromatic hydrocarbons, these really big chunks of like benzenes, and these are ashy and sooty and gaseous, and those are often carcinogenic, they are often mutagens, they're really nasty. So that's the kind of stuff that you find like in oil spills or when there's like a giant fire at a landfill. That stuff's really bad. We don't want that. There are still bad byproducts of the pyrolysis process. Dioxins are one of the big ones that are an issue. But the key difference is the byproducts of the pyrolysis process are almost all liquid or wax. And even though these are carcinogenic to humans, the bacteria we are using can still eat them and digest them. So they're eating things like styrene, the monomer, which to us is quite toxic, but to them, they can oxidize that and they can use it as a food source. So because we are not using oxygen in the burning process, we're not getting big smoky fumes. All we're getting is CO2, water vapor, a little bit of like, carbon monoxide and some methane and stuff like that. But the rest is all liquids, gases. It's all liquids and oils and things like that, which the bacteria can't eat. So that's the critical difference. Emissions-wise, it is far better than just burning these things. And the impact, of course, is making a fertilizer. And one of the benefits of making a fertilizer is that it's used to grow plants, which then sequester a lot of the carbon that you generate from this process, which is quite nice.
Let's say that I was to take oil out of the ground. How different is it than your pyrolysis results, like the product? Like, so you do the pyrolysis. How different is it than oil I get out of the ground? Could you kind of not that you would, but could you take the rest of your process where you feed it to microbes and then you feed it to worms? Could you do that with like crude oil, or would it have to be very specific oils?
So
It's
interesting.
Is it really not close at all?
It's actually very close. So your intuition is very correct here, because a lot of the same bacteria we are finding in these worms' guts that are able to digest these are the same bacteria that are being found near oil spills. Same exact kind of bacteria, same enzymatic processes. And so it does work the other way around, because all we're doing when we take these hydrocarbons and we're heating them up is we're basically just putting them back to what they used to be, more or less. We're breaking them down back into oils again. It's not the same exact oils, for example, and it also depends on the plastic. Like, for example, with polystyrene, we're breaking it down into styrene. Like, no one's putting an oil derrick rig out and like getting styrene out of the ground. Styrene is not something you find out there.
Something that we
Yeah, it's something we make, but it's made from a very similar, like benzenes, which we do get from crude through the refining process.
So we get these oils and waxes. What's the next step in the process? You said something about a biodigester or a bioreactor.
Bioreactor, yes.
So a bioreactor, it is a cool name. It's functionally a big worm gut. It's a big jar or vessel or cylinder, whatever it might be, that has been inoculated, so coated with all the bacteria that we find in their guts, and it has been given some oxygen and agitation to simulate kind of the conditions of the worm's gut where these guys normally live. And then we're feeding into it, just as we would feed to the worm, all these oils and waxes. And they plop into it, and the bacteria, they just start going crazy. They start chewing through it, eating through it, and digesting it in this giant gut. And what comes out is the same kind of stuff you'd find in the worm's gut kind of halfway through digestion. So they're eating it like they would anything else, and they're pooping like they would with anything else.
What does that look like when it's done? I mean, I can picture oils and waxes because I've picked up stuff out of my ear and I've spilled oil on the ground, changing your oil. But I can't picture what this, you're saying like all these acids look like. Is it just...
It's kind of orange. It's kind of orangey yellow. So it's kind of yellowish and orangey yellowish. And so what's cool about it is the digestion of it is kind of like the digestion you'd see of any other food you put in there. So have you ever seen like a brewery where beer is made? So you've got like yeast thrown into like sugar water or hops or whatever it is where they're making alcohol. The liquid will change color. So there's this like yellowy color that emerges. It's kind of off-white. And then there's like foam that develops as well. It looks almost exactly like that because it is almost exactly that same kind of process. So instead of sugars or, peptides or whatever from the potato or from the sugarcane or the hops being eaten by yeast, in this case, the oils and waxes are being eaten by our bacteria, and they're producing very similar kinds of outputs. Not alcohol in this case, because we are doing it with oxygen aerobically. But I know, right?
It would have been a different kind of brew.
But we are brewing and getting, secondary metabolites. So these are things like polyphenol compounds, phenolic acid, polyhydroxyl alkanoates. So just big organic stuff. And it's this yellowish off-white liquid. So that liquid, we need to get rid of it because it's not super useful at that point. It's already been digested. We want the worms to be able to eat it, but the worms don't eat liquids. They eat solids. So all we do is we turn it into Jell-O. We throw gelatin into it, and it makes a big gelatinous goop, which you toss that on a worm bin, and they go crazy for it. They love it.
Wow, interesting. Okay, so the bacteria are what really doing a lot of the work here. And I remember we interviewed a company called Polyloop a while back. Mm-hmm. And I remember that the founder of that company talked about how they had IP. They actually had bacteria that they had patented. And I remember at the time being a little shocked that you could do that. Is that a deal breaker here? Because does someone else own the IP on the bacteria that you're using?
No. So we ourselves patented our own process. And in fact, What's interesting is that it's not it's not from a technical perspective. It's not super difficult to just make a slightly different bacteria and patent that. And then say, oh, this is my proprietary blend. It happens all the time in industry. So we don't rely on the bacteria as kind of being the safeguard of the IP, because there are fairly off-the-shelf bacteria that do these kinds of things. The trick is putting the bacteria together with all the other parts of the system, having the worm farm, having the plastic collection, relationships, that's a much better ward or shield than just saying, I own these bacteria. But I mean, we do have a patent on that as well. So what actually has been something I've wrestled with a lot is whether or not we should just kind of make this like open source almost, like make this something anyone can do. And ultimately, while that would be nice from an ideological perspective, it would harm the ability to commercialize this, which ultimately I think will slow down the adoption of this technology. And two, even if this was open source, I don't think almost anyone would be duplicating it, because it requires, like I said, a very specific set of equipment and institutional knowledge and connections and things like that, which are quite hard to duplicate.
It's not like
it could be
3D
duplicated.
printing. It's like 3D printing is like, oh, I drew a line and then it prints oh, wow, look at, I have a thing. It's like, right. That's pretty easy because the machine did all the work for you.
Well, let me ask you. So we're talking about business here, and we're on disruptive investing,
Sure.
and this is disruptive for sure.
Mhm.
And then there's the investing part. So like, if I want to invest in your company, or people watching do, like, talk to us about how can they first of all reach out to you? Because I feel like there's some smart people watching who might even know how to help you. Maybe they work in government, or maybe they're good at that. So how can they reach out to you and talk to you about that stuff? And then let's talk about what your next plans are for investment.
So those are good questions. So if you want to reach me, because I love talking to people, if that doesn't come across, my email is sam, S-A-M, @wrigglebrew.com. So just send me an email and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I love talking about the technology, the process, and I'm also interested in talking to people about investment. So we've bootstrapped this entire thing so far. We started in 2022. The research actually began in like 2020, but the business started in 2022. We've bootstrapped the whole thing. We've had 2 federal grants. We've had a good number of sales. So we're not like desperate for investors. We're not like trying to find venture capital or something like that. Especially because we kind of want to keep pure to the mission. We don't want to get sidetracked going after, this has the highest ROI, whereas this is what we think is more important. But we are trying to find people who have connections or who have, because as I've said, it's been very challenging to communicate this and to break into the market from like a here's what we're doing perspective. So we are trying to reach people who have that experience. And if you're interested in talking to me about that, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk. Someone I'd actually really like to talk to, and I know this isn't super relevant to the podcast necessarily, but I really want to talk to Elon Musk. And I know it's kind of controversial, but I really want to talk to him because one of my friends who's been using our earthworms for her experiments, she has been able to get earthworms to survive in Martian regolith and in lunar regolith. Simulated, not the actual stuff, but chemically exactly the same. And all that we've been doing is like, okay, pressure is 1 atmosphere, temperature is like room temperature, and we put a little bit of like compost or food waste in it. But they are surviving in Martian soil. That's really cool, which kind of gets to what we're going to talk about in a second, which is what we would do in the future. Well, I want to see this technology, these earthworms, used not just to fight plastic here on Earth, but also potentially used to help further the human colonization efforts for Mars. Like, can you imagine
Mars worms
having
Mars worms, right? Like, and it also makes me wonder, how would they grow in 38% gravity? Because Mars has lower gravity than Earth. Would they get bigger?
I don't know. It's an
I
interesting
think
question.
there's a book about giant worms on a desert planet.
Is that how they got so big?
When I was first making the company, I was like, how can I reference that? How can I make Dune part of my company? It's not really proven possible, but Listen al Gaib. I mean, it is a cool concept though, because these worms, the earthworms, they're not just the key to digesting plastic. I think they are also one of the most powerful organisms when it comes to regenerating soil here on Earth. Charles Darwin, he spent like the last 15 years of his life just studying earthworms, because he realized from working with all these farmers that everywhere the earthworms were, they were getting way better yields. The soil was being able to be used for many more years than normal. Here today, we're finding soil depletion is a huge problem. We've got, we're losing like an inch of topsoil like every year or something. it's really, really bad right now. We all need topsoil to live, because if we don't have topsoil, we don't have food. And the petrochemical fertilizers we're using they're making that worse. They're killing a lot of the soil microbes. Earthworms, they may be able to help push the clock back on that, which I think is amazing.
I think you're preaching to the choir, because when we started our Now You Know channel like 10 years ago, I think one of our first videos was vermicomposting. Yeah. It was worm composting. Because
if you scroll down on our video page,
just keep going 1,000 videos.
All the way to the bottom. It's like video 2 or 3.
Because you're exactly right. They are so important, and yet they are the unsung heroes of pretty much everything, which is so often the case, right? With bees and other things, and we're talking about bacteria.
But now they're actually able to eat plastic. All right,
product. So you've asked for a couple of big things here. We got to get Elon Musk to talk to you. So everyone watching, don't tell us to do it, because that's what you normally do.
Yeah.
Go do your own connections to Elon Musk. And Elon, if you're watching, call up Sam. But
Please.
then also, I mean, it sounds like a lot of you could be really helpful to Sam in so many ways, and which would then be good for the planet. So that's why I love what you're working on. You are doing a very Elon Musk thing, which is trying to solve a problem that will help humanity. And I love that that's what capitalism is really good at, is solving those problems when you address them. And here, I mean, I don't know why for the past few decades we've been ignoring this just huge plastic problem we have as if it'll just go away, and it won't. And maybe now finally we have a potential answer.
I mean, it couldn't come too soon, because we have like a credit card's worth of plastic in our brains. And I don't think this will solve all of it. In fact, I think it will probably only be like a piece of solving it, like a small piece. But any headway we can make on this front is absolutely critical at this point, because, like you said, no one's doing anything about it. It's getting worse and worse and worse. We're recycling small amounts of it, which just delays the problem. And it's ending up in all of our rivers and our bodies and all these other places. And you're right. This is one of the things that capitalism can do if we tune it right. We can find ways to solve big problems that generate value for the economy. And this is where I think Wriggle Brew is very uniquely well positioned, because in Florida, where I live, right, we've had a lot of campaigning against fertilizer. So I talked briefly about how synthetic fertilizer is really bad for the soil. The reason is because it kills off all these soil bacteria, causes these big red tides. So the political binomial we have going on right now is one side says, let's just ignore that problem so that we can continue to have 1.5 million jobs related to fertilizer and fertilization, which is fair. A lot of people's families rely on the ability to fertilize. And the other side says we need to ban all fertilizer. Fertilizer is hurting the environment. We need to get rid of all of it. I don't care if it costs 1.5 million jobs and, Disney, their lawns are going to look like gray. We need to get rid of it all. Neither of those are good solutions. One is kind of an obstinate head in the sand approach. The other one is like aggressively self-destructive. So we need to find a way to make fertilizer. This is it's an engineering challenge. It's not a policy challenge. We need to find a way to make fertilizer that does not harm the environment, that our 1.5 million landscapers and nursery folks and other jobs can use without them having to spend more money on it. And that's the advantage of worm castings, is that worm castings can be used to make fertilizer that is more affordable than synthetics, as effective as synthetics, and does not cause those environmental problems. So the engineering challenge is now solved. We now need to solve the sales challenge of actually getting it to the farmers and landscapers and so forth. But that single little political issue is a microcosm of our problems as a species, or our problems at least nationally as a whole. Like we do have serious climate concerns. We do have serious planetary problems we're facing that we need to address, but we cannot commit suicide to solve those problems. Being a massive misanthrope is not the solution.
Well, in terms of scaling up, what's your vision? Would this be something where you would build a giant plant in the middle of the country and then bring all the plastics to you and then ship out all the fertilizer from there? Or is this like a local thing that you have to build a lot of these breweries near to where the plastic is?
It's a very good question. It is a little bit of both. So yes, we do want some centralized locations where we're processing plastic in bulk, because economies of scale are great. But we also want to have localized production. We want to be in lots of areas that are geographically divergent from one another, so we're not paying huge logistics costs to transport plastic waste. This is also a process that scales very easily. So it can be done in our lab currently when we're doing it on a scale of like a couple 100 pounds of plastic and, bioreactor that's ranging in size from like a mason jar up to 55 liters. But this can be something that can be done on the scale of like an industrial brewery. So it can be done at many different scales, meaning you could have a plastics processing plant, down in Lakeland, that's bringing in all the grocery store plastic from all over Florida. But then you could have one that's just for Seminole County, where I live, just for our little town of Lake Mary that just works with our, transfer station. That could be one as much as you could have one large one. And ultimately, we are still learning. There's still research going on right now. There's still, we're not even through our first major pilot project. So we're going to learn a lot about how this process works and plugs in to farms and plugs into plastic sources. So we may find that a few years from now that the best model is something I haven't even predicted. But as far as we can see right now, it is something that really can apply everywhere from Malawi to Massachusetts. And that gives me a lot of hope, because that means that plastic is not something that's, only solvable if you have very specific certain conditions, but it's something we can universally solve.
And it seems like your process also allows for other feedstocks, as it were, not necessarily plastic feedstocks, but also say like food waste, because you've got your pyrolysis, then you've got the bioreactor, and then you got your worm farm, and worm farms can take in different types of food waste, I would assume fairly easily. I mean, is that how most of your Wriggle brew is made?
So not at present. At present, most of the brew comes from worm castings we get from some professional worm farmers that we work with. That's just because we work with large farms and they need to know that it's consistent from batch to batch to batch. But on the experimental side, we have verified that using diverse forms of wastes with our worms, because we do have a small worm farm, does not affect the performance of the product. In fact, we can actually get the performance to be slightly better than we're getting from some of these professional worm farmers. Not a huge amount better, but slightly better, just because of some methods we've developed.
Because it just seems to me that like at a municipal level, or like a city or a town or even a regional, we have trash collection, trash management. Usually there's a big place where they dump it or sort it or do stuff like that. Seems like a really good spot to be like, hey, here's all the stuff that we're very sure is like, say, polystyrene and PET and all the other plastics that you can use. And we also have a bunch of food scraps. Let's pop that into a process, and now we can actually start to make profit off of it, as opposed to making the money from the town to just kind of collect and dispose of it. We can actually sort of sell it back, even in town, as like a local fertilizer, especially if you turned it into a brew, like you were saying, or even just worm castings. It seems like it would be a very valuable way to turn this into a moneymaker.
Absolutely. And another part of this that's cool I didn't even mention is that the digestion of the plastics yields organic material generally. That doesn't have to be fed to just earthworms. That can be food for fish farms. That can be food for insect larva farms. That can be food for chicken and pork. So you can process a lot of waste material into feedstocks for lots of other kinds of agriculture. Right now we're focusing on earthworms because that's kind of our bread and butter, but it's conceivable easily that it could be done with other kinds of animals. So you're absolutely right. You could set this up at a municipal, disposal area. Let's say somewhere out in the Midwest, where you're getting in like all kinds of farm waste, chicken litter, and cotton shake, and all kinds of other biological stuff. And then you're also getting in all the like plastic, liners that they're using in the farm, all the feed bags, all of those plastic materials too. And now you can process those parallel, and you have composting on the one hand, you have the biodegradation in our bioreactor of the plastics on the other, and now at the end you have two biological inputs that can then be combined in the worm farm into making fertilizer that can then go back out into the farm to make more calories, to make more food, to make more stuff. So that can be done in a lot of places. And technologically speaking, like I said, it's not that advanced. It's not like nuclear fusion or something. It can be done pretty basically if you have competent engineers and time. So it could be done by a local government. It could be done by a relatively small business that's out there. So that's the dream and the hope, is that it does become something that, again, maybe it isn't going to be a node system like this, a franchise system like this, but it could be. And if it did become that, then it could become something that each community is now getting something back from their plastic, rather than it becoming a big mountain in their backyard.
Sam, this just got me thinking. I wonder if you are open to internships. I wonder if there's people watching right now who'd be like, never thought I'd be interested in this, but it is interesting. Is it something you've ever thought about having, summer internships or something like that, or employees? Are you at that point of expansion?
Well, we do have some employees right now. We actually have roughly like 7 guys that are working for us in various capacities, but interns, not yet. That's probably a little farther out, just because we're still quite small. Our revenue is 6 figures, so it's not something where we can really afford to have that many people. But a few years down the line, I mean, I'd be happy to have people learn from this process, because I was an intern engineer actually, and I learned a lot from that, and that helped inspire what I ended up doing here. So yeah, I would not be opposed to that.
So last question. I know that you sell Wriggle Brew to farmers. Is it also available on your website if anyone watching wants to get some of it themselves?
Yes, it is. So if you want Wriggle Brew for your garden, we sell bundles of it. We sell bottles of it. People use it for backyard gardens. In fact, we actually have the Village's Butterfly Garden Club here in Florida. They have a big sponsorship of ours because it's the only fertilizer they use on their butterfly gardens. So if you have butterflies, or if you have pollinators, or you just have pets and you don't want them to be around toxic fertilizer, our stuff is available. It's on wrigglebrew.com. It's also on Amazon. You can find us there. So yeah, give it a shot. It's very easy to use, and it's not going to kill your soil, which is the important thing.
Now, if somebody does buy Wriggle Brew, is that plastic came from plastic, or is that just normal worm casting brew?
Right now, it's just normal worm casting brew. So we're doing all of our worm casting brew production on one side, and we're doing all this processing of plastics with worms to make worm castings on the other, but none of the worm castings from that are being used commercially at the moment. We've done tests with some commercial farmers, and the results have looked really good, but we're trying to put together like a really ironclad case with a lot of lab testing behind it, especially by third parties who are not us, who can assure that the plastic is completely gone. There are no toxins. There are no toxic byproducts or impacts of this. Because, if the plastic is not being fully digested, well, then that's a problem with the system. It needs to be tuned. So we're putting together a really ironclad case there so that we're not making the problem worse. And in fact, we're gonna make it better. We're gonna solve this problem. And my final thing that I wanted to add to that is the goal isn't even necessarily just to make worm castings. One of the things that I really, really want to do with this process is I want to get the bacteria to produce these enzymes that they're using for digestion of the plastics in greater and greater volumes, so that one day we can eventually have enough enzyme produced by these bacteria that we can start shipping the enzymes out to landfills, to farms, to people, to start for them to be able to break down plastics in the environment in situ without having to actually have it sent all the way back to a processing facility. I mean, and imagine, especially, I talked about like ocean cleanups. Imagine an ocean cleanup ship that's just come back from sweeping up the Pacific, and it's got a deck full of plastic. And we put the enzymes from these microbes on that deck and start having the plastic breaking down literally on the journey home. That's possible. And that's the long-term vision here, is not just making worm castings from plastic material, but using this biochemical pathway to produce compounds, enzymes that can be used to break down plastics throughout the world, regardless of whether worm castings result or not.
That's so cool.
That really is cool. I can't wait to see that reality.
Me too, right? It's a really exciting idea, but we got to get there first, so stay tuned.
That's great. Sam, I hope we can check back with you in the future and see how things are going. And again, if people want to get in touch with you or go to your website, where should they go?
Wrigglebrew.com. So WRIGGLEBREW, wrigglebrew.com. That's where you can find us on the web. And if you'd like to reach out to me personally, Sam, SAM, at wrigglebrew.com. Send me an email, especially if you can contact Elon Musk, because I'd love to tell them about worms on Mars.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. This is a lot of fun talking to you today. I can't wait to talk to you some more, and I wish you the best of luck with everything going forward.
Thank you, fellas. It was a pleasure being on.